The night was cold and silent, except for the sound of wind moving through the tall trees. John sat near the fireplace inside his small wooden cabin, sipping warm tea. He lived alone on this farming planet for many years, far from the busy cities. Life here was quiet, and he liked it that way. But that night, something felt strange. The wind was too strong, the air too heavy. It was the kind of night when animals stayed hidden. John's dog, Rusty, lifted his head and growled at the door. Then John heard it, a faint sound from the forest. At first, he thought it was the wind playing tricks, but it came again, soft and weak, like a child crying. John put on his coat, grabbed his lantern, and stepped outside. The cold air bit at his skin, and the darkness seemed endless. Rusty stayed close to him, growling low. The cries grew louder as he walked toward the trees. They were not human cries. There was something different, almost musical, yet filled with pain. Branches cracked under his boots, and the lantern light shook in his hand. The forest was alive with shadows. He pushed deeper until he reached a small clearing. There, in the snow and mud, lay a tiny figure curled into a ball. She was small, no more than 6 years old, but her skin was pale blue. Her hair was long and silver, tangled with leaves. Her clothes were torn and wet, and she clutched something glowing in her hand. John knelt beside her and spoke softly. "Hey, it's all right. I won't hurt you." She looked up, her eyes wide and shining like 2 small moons. Her lips moved, but the words were in a language he didn't understand. Still, he could hear the fear in her voice. When John reached out his hand, she flinched, but then, after a moment, she placed her tiny, cold hand into his. Her skin was freezing, and he could feel her shaking. He lifted her into his arms. Surprised at how light she was, Rusty sniffed her and wagged his tail, as if understanding she was no threat. The glowing object in her hand was a pendant, carved with strange symbols. It pulsed with a soft blue light, almost like it was alive. John decided not to ask questions now. She needed warmth, food, and safety. As they walked back to the cabin, he kept looking over his shoulder. He felt like someone or something was watching. The trees seemed to shift in the wind, and far away, a shadow moved between them. Rusty growled again, but the sound faded into the night inside the cabin. John placed her near the fire and wrapped her in a thick blanket. She sat quietly, eyes darting around the room, still holding the pendant tightly. He gave her a cup of warm broth, and she sipped it slowly. Never taking her eyes off him, John tried speaking again, using simple words, pointing at himself. "John," he said, after a pause. She touched her chest and whispered something that sounded like Luma. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She seemed calmer now, but John could still feel the tension in the air. It was like the storm outside had followed them in spirit. Later that night, when Luma was asleep on the couch, John stepped outside. The wind had stopped, and the forest was quiet again. Too quiet. Snow crunched under his boots as he walked around the cabin. That's when he saw them strange footprints. Leading away from the trees, they were large, clawed, and fresh. Whoever or whatever had been watching them was not far. John's grip tightened on his lantern as he scanned the shadows. The feeling of being hunted returned, heavier than before. He went back inside and locked the door. Rusty lay in front of it, ears twitching at every sound. John sat near the fire, watching the small alien girl sleep. Her pendant's glow cast faint blue light across her face. She looked peaceful now, but he knew that whatever had left those tracks would come back. And when it did, he had to be ready. Outside, far beyond the trees, a pair of glowing yellow eyes watched the cabin, unblinking. The night was only beginning. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting pale light over the frost-covered fields. John stood at the kitchen table, slicing bread while keeping one eye on the small alien girl sitting quietly by the fire. She hadn't let go of that glowing pendant even once, holding it as if it were part of her. Rusty sat at her feet, watching her with curious eyes. Tail gently sweeping the floor, John placed a plate of bread and cheese in front of her. Gesturing for her to eat, she hesitated, then took a small bite, her gaze never leaving his face. Her movements were delicate, careful, as if she had been taught to survive by being silent and unnoticed. He tried speaking to her again, pointing to objects and naming them in his language. She repeated some words. Softly, her voice melodic but strange. It wasn't much, but with each word, the distance between them grew smaller. John found himself studying her features, the faint shimmer in her skin, the unusual shape of her ears, the way her eyes reflected the light like pools of silver. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, yet there was a fragility in her that felt painfully human. Days passed, and the winter storms grew harsher, forcing them to stay inside most of the time. John built a small bed for her in the corner, stuffing it with soft blankets at night. He would hear her whisper in her own language, as if speaking to someone who wasn't there. Sometimes, when she thought he was asleep, she would open the pendant, and the light inside would swirl like moving water, casting strange patterns on the walls. It was beautiful, but it made John uneasy. He had a feeling it wasn't just jewelry. It was a signal, or maybe even a key, and if it was, someone might already be looking for it. One evening, as the wind howled outside, John noticed her staring at the window with a tense expression. Her small hands gripped the pendant tightly, her lips moving in quick whispers. Rusty began to growl low in his throat, looking toward the forest. John went to the window but saw nothing, only shadows between the trees. Still, the unease grew in his chest. That night, he stayed awake longer than usual, keeping the rifle close by. When he finally drifted to sleep, he dreamed of tall, dark figures walking through the snow, their eyes glowing yellow like the ones he had seen that first night. Weeks turned into months, and the bond between them deepened. She began to smile more, to laugh softly at Rusty's clumsy attempts to play. Her fear seemed to fade, though at times she would suddenly go quiet, her gaze distant. John didn't press her for answers. He knew trust took time. But he also knew that her past was still out there, and sooner or later it would come knocking on the first day of spring. The air was warmer, and the snow had begun to melt. John took her outside to plant seeds in the soil, showing her how to press them gently into the ground. She followed his instructions carefully, but after a while she stood still, looking up at the sky. Her eyes widened, and John turned to see what she was staring at, far above the clouds. A faint shape moved, smooth, metallic, and unlike any human craft. It hovered for a moment, then vanished into the clouds. John's heart sank. He didn't need to ask who it belonged to. Somewhere far beyond this quiet farm, the people who had lost her were getting closer. The day began with a strange stillness. The air was heavy, and even the birds in the trees seemed silent. John was repairing the fence when the sound reached him, a deep, steady hum that made the ground tremble. He looked up and saw the clouds parting as a massive silver ship descended, its surface gleaming like liquid metal. Luma froze in the middle of the field, her hands gripping the glowing pendant against her chest. Rusty barked furiously, running in circles. Sensing something was wrong, the ship landed on the far edge of the meadow. Crushing the grass beneath it, a ramp lowered slowly, releasing a soft mist into the air from the shadows inside. A tall figure stepped forward, her movements smooth and graceful. Her skin was the same pale blue as Luma's, her long silver hair flowing like a river of light. She wore armor that shimmered under the sun, each piece etched with markings that looked almost alive, Her eyes, the same silver shade as Luma's, locked onto the small girl standing beside John. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the woman raised her hand, her voice carrying across the field, speaking in the same language Luma often whispered in her sleep. Luma's eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling as she whispered one word back. The sound of it made the woman's face soften. John didn't understand the words, but he understood their weight. This was no stranger. This was family. The woman stepped closer, her gaze shifting briefly to John, studying him with a guarded expression. Her eyes moved over his worn clothes, the dirt on his hands. The way he stood protectively in front of Luma. She spoke again, this time slower, as if trying to bridge the gap between them. John shook his head slightly. "I don't understand you," he said, his voice firm. Luma stepped forward, glancing at both of them, her small voice breaking the tension. "She says her name is Alira. She's my mother." The words hit John like a blow he wasn't ready for. He looked at Luma, then at the tall woman whose gaze was now softer, but no less intense. Alira's eyes flicked to the pendant in Luma's hand, and something in her face shifted relief, mixed with urgency. She spoke again, faster this time. Her tone sharper, as if time was running out. Luma translated slowly, struggling with some words. She wants me to come with her. She says it's not safe here." John's jaw tightened. For years, he had protected Luma from the unknown. And now that unknown stood right in front of his home, asking to take her away. Alira seemed to sense his hesitation because she stepped closer, her voice lowering, almost gentle. But John noticed her eyes scanning the forest around them, her hand resting near the weapon strapped to her hip. She wasn't just here for a reunion, she was expecting trouble. The moment was broken by a sharp, distant sound, a cracking noise from the tree line, followed by a low, unnatural growl. Rusty's ears shot up, and his growl matched the one coming from the woods. Alira's body tensed instantly, her silver eyes narrowing as she turned toward the sound. She said something quick and urgent to Luma, who gripped John's arm tightly. "They're here," Luma whispered, her voice shaking. John didn't ask who they were. He could feel the danger closing in. The growl from the forest grew louder. Joined by the sound of branches breaking under heavy steps, Alira moved like a soldier, stepping in front of Luma with one hand out, signaling John to stay close. Her other hand gripped a sleek weapon from her belt, its edges glowing faint blue. John didn't know what was coming, but he knew one thing. Whatever it was, Alira had been expecting it through the trees. Dark shapes appeared, tall and broad, their skin a mottled mix of gray and black. Their eyes glowing a sickly yellow. Each carried jagged weapons that looked more like claws than blades. John felt Luma press closer to him, her small fingers trembling as they clung to his coat. The creatures stopped at the edge of the meadow, their leader stepping forward with a slow, deliberate motion. It spoke in a guttural, growling tongue, the sound deep enough to rattle in John's chest. Alira replied sharply, her tone like steel. Luma whispered quickly to John, "They are slavers. They took me before. They want me back." The words burned through him. He finally understood the fear in her eyes the night he found her. He also understood why Alira had come. The leader tilted its head, its eyes flicking between Alira and Luma before settling on John. It let out a sound that might have been laughter, low and mocking. Alira's weapon hummed in her hand, the blue glow intensifying without warning. The slavers rushed forward, their feet tearing into the grass. Alira moved with deadly speed, meeting them halfway, her strikes precise and fluid. John pulled Luma back toward the cabin, grabbing the rifle he had kept leaning near the door. He aimed, fired, and one of the slavers dropped with a roar. The fight was fast and brutal. flashes of light and bursts of alien energy lighting up the meadow. Elira's movements were almost inhuman, her body twisting and striking with perfect control. John stayed near Luma, firing when he had a clear shot within minutes. The surviving slavers retreated into the forest, their glowing eyes fading into the shadows. The meadow fell silent except for the heavy sound of breathing. Elira stood over one of the fallen creatures, her weapon still ready. Her armor was scratched. Her hair tangled, but her eyes burned with determination. She walked back toward them, speaking quickly to Luma. The girl translated, her voice quiet. She says they will come again. In greater numbers, they won't stop until they have me. John's chest tightened. Elira's gaze shifted to him, and for the first time, there was no judgment in her eyes, only urgency. She spoke again, slower now, and Luma added, she says I must leave. But she also says she can't keep me safe alone. John realized what she was asking without the words being spoken. She needed him. The idea of working with her felt strange, almost impossible, yet he had seen how she fought for Luma, the same way he had for years. The truth was clear, whatever was coming. They would only survive if they faced it together. Outside, the forest was quiet again, but the air still felt heavy, somewhere out there. The slavers were regrouping, and the real battle hadn't even begun. The days after the attack felt like walking on thin ice. John and Elira kept watch in shifts, never leaving Luma alone for even a moment. The forest that once felt like home now seemed to hold eyes in every shadow. Rusty barked at nothing more, often his fur standing up as if he sensed things before they came. John tried to keep their routine normal, planting crops, fixing the roof, teaching Luma to read, but every sound outside made him tense. Elira spent hours checking the perimeter, leaving strange small devices in the ground that hummed softly. She never explained what they were, but he knew they were meant to warn her before danger came. One night, the warning came. A sharp pulse of blue light flashed from one of Elira's devices, followed by the low hum turning into a shrill alarm. Elira was already moving, grabbing her weapon. Her voice low but sharp, telling John to get Luma inside the cellar. Before they could reach it, the first explosion tore through the far side of the field. The shockwave knocked John to his knees, dirt raining down on them. Figures poured out from the tree line, not just a few this time, but dozens, their glowing yellow eyes cutting through the darkness. They moved fast, their weapons gleaming, surrounding the farm like a tightening net. Elira charged into them without hesitation, her movements a blur. John fired from the porch, each shot sending one of the creatures down, but they kept coming. Luma huddled behind him, clutching the pendant so tightly her knuckles turned pale. One of the slavers broke through the line, rushing toward them. John swung the rifle like a club, knocking it back, then kicked it down the steps. Elira was there a second later, finishing the job with a swift strike. The air was thick with smoke and the sharp, metallic scent of alien weapons. A sudden flash lit up the meadow, a different kind of light, pure and blinding. John turned to see Luma standing with her pendant open. The blue light inside wasn't just glowing now. It was pouring out in streams, swirling around her like living water. The slavers nearest to her froze mid-step, their bodies stiffening before they collapsed. Elira shouted something in her own language, part warning, part awe. John realized that the thing he thought was just jewelry was far more dangerous. It wasn't a weapon in the way he understood, but it had power, and it had just saved them. The remaining slavers pulled back, dragging their wounded with them. The night grew quiet again, broken only by the sound of burning in the distance. Elira approached Luma slowly, her eyes fixed on the pendant. She spoke softly to the girl, who nodded but didn't let go of it. John stepped forward, his voice low. "What is that thing?" Luma looked up at him, her silver eyes reflecting the firelight. "It's why they want me," she said quietly. Her words were heavy, each one carrying the weight of a truth John wasn't sure he wanted to hear. Illyra glanced at him, and in that moment, John understood something without being told. Whatever this pendant was, it was the key to everything: her past, their danger, and the war Illyra had hinted at. And now, because he had chosen to protect her, it was his fight too. The farm felt different after the attack. The air was thick with the smell of smoke that refused to fade. John patched the holes in the walls while Illyra cleaned her weapons at the table. Neither spoke much, but the silence between them wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, filled with things neither wanted to say. Luma tried to act normal, helping John in the garden during the day and sitting with Illyra at night. But John noticed the way her eyes shifted between them. She could feel the tension too. One evening, as the sun dipped low, John finally broke the silence. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice steady. "They know where we are." Illyra looked up sharply, her silver eyes cold. "I can protect her," she said firmly. "I have protected her before you ever knew she existed." John set down his tools and met her gaze. "You lost her once," he said, his tone low, "and I found her bleeding in the snow." The words hit like a blade, and for a moment, Illyra's face softened, but only for a breath. Luma stepped between them, her hands gripping both of theirs. "I don't want to choose," she said quietly. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were clear. John felt the weight of that truth. This wasn't just about keeping her safe. It was about who she belonged to. Illyra's hand tightened around Luma's, as if she feared letting go would mean losing her again. That night, the tension only grew. John heard Illyra moving around long after midnight, checking her strange devices and staring out the windows. He couldn't sleep either, his thoughts circling the same fear: the slavers would come back, and next time they might win. A sudden, sharp sound broke the stillness. Not the alarm this time, but a faint tapping on the side of the house. Rusty's ears went up, and a low growl rolled from his throat. John grabbed his rifle and moved toward the door, Illyra right behind him with her weapon drawn. They stepped outside into the cold, their breath misting in the air. At first, there was nothing but the pale moonlight on the frost.
Hey, Mom. Hey.
Then John saw it, a small black sphere lying in the dirt near the wall, pulsing with dim red light. Illyra's eyes widened, and she shouted something urgent, pulling him back toward the door. The moment they stepped inside, the ground shook, and a deep rumble rolled through the earth. The sphere exploded silently, sending a wave of strange energy rippling out across the field. John didn't hear a sound, but he felt it in his bones, heavy, wrong. Like the world itself had shifted. Luma gasped and clutched her pendant. The light inside was flickering. Wildly, almost as if it were afraid, Illyra grabbed John's arm, her voice low but urgent. "They are here," she said, and this time her eyes held no doubt, only the truth they had both been trying to ignore. The night lit up with the glow of alien ships descending through the clouds. They moved in silence, their dark hulls reflecting the moonlight. Closing in from every direction, John could feel the ground trembling under his boots. Each step of the approaching slavers shaking the air. Illyra stood by the door, her weapon charged and ready, her silver hair catching the light like a blade. Luma was in the middle of the room, clutching her pendant, the blue light inside now swirling fast. Almost alive, Rusty barked furiously, pacing back and forth as if he understood that this was the final stand. The first shadow broke through the tree line, then another and another, until the meadow was full of glowing yellow eyes. John took position at the window, firing into the crowd each shot, slowing them but never stopping their advance. Illyra moved like a storm, meeting the enemy at the edge of the porch, her strikes cutting through their front line. The air was filled with the sharp hiss of energy weapons and the metallic scent of battle. Luma's breathing was fast, her eyes locked on the scene outside. John shouted for her to stay back, but she stepped forward instead, the pendant glowing brighter than ever. A slaver broke past Illyra and charged toward Luma. John's rifle was empty, and he threw it aside. Rushing forward before he could reach her, the pendant flared with a burst of pure blue light. The energy hit the slaver mid-stride, freezing it in place before it crumbled into ash. Illyra's eyes widened, not in fear, but in realization. She's not just carrying the key. Illyra shouted over the noise. She is the key. The slavers hesitated, their advance slowing as they watched the light surround Luma like a shield. John moved to her side, Illyra covering them both as the enemy regrouped. Together, the three of them stepped forward, the glow from the pendant spreading across the field. Every slaver that touched the light staggered and fell. Unable to cross its reach, the meadow became silent again, the remaining ships lifting away into the clouds, leaving behind only the cold night air. John looked at Luma, her small frame trembling from the effort. Illyra knelt beside her, placing both hands on her shoulders, her voice soft. "You chose to fight with us," she said. "That makes you more than my daughter." "It makes you ours." Luma turned her silver eyes toward John, and a faint smile broke across her face. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "I want to stay." With both of you, for the first time, Illyra's gaze on John held no challenge, only understanding. They were no longer strangers bound by conflict, but a family bound by choice, inside the cabin. The fire crackled warmly, chasing away the cold. The three of them sat together, Rusty curled at their feet, the night outside finally still. The war wasn't over, but whatever came next, they would face it together.